In this second video, I'm going to present to you the last half of the lesson plan. In the previous video, I presented the inquiry lesson components that included the compelling questions, supporting questions, featured sources and activities, summative assessments, and the taking informed action. From this point, I'm going to be talking about items that are new for the lesson plan, beginning with extensions and remediations. I will also be sharing with you the rubric for the assessment. So let's first talk about extension and remediations. So these are not the same thing as the extension summative assessment. In fact, these extension and remediation activities should occur after one of the three formative assessments. In one of those formative assessments, you have assessed children's learning. There will be some students who completely understand the material, and there may be some students who struggle with the material. You want to ensure mastery, so before you move to the next question. So that's the point in time where you would engage in an extension and remediation learning activity. An extension activity is that which allows students to build on top of their learning. It provides them with a deeper challenge. Remediation is your opportunity to reteach the material to students who need more instruction or practice. So with that, think about learning activities that are different from the ways in which you taught and assessed the first time. So if you showed a video to students and then you did a word sort, you would want to do a different type of source to reteach and then a different type of formative assessment. Accommodations for special learners is the next component that needs to be included. These include interventions, adaptations, accommodations for students with disabilities, students who are identified as gifted, and those students who have language barriers, such as ELL students. You need to have one accommodation or adaptation for each population. Now, because of where this class falls in the program, I do not require you to have a full knowledge base of appropriate accommodations and adaptations. In fact, I encourage you to use internet resources to find appropriate accommodations and adaptations, such as doing a Google search for interventions for ELL students in third grade, or social studies interventions for ELL students in third grade. There are entire websites populated with representative interventions or activities that could be done for each of these three populations. Do remember that the extension and remediation activity is not the same as this. So do not note that the students who are gifted will be completing the extension activity after a formative assessment, and the students with ELL barriers or students with disabilities will be completing the remediation. They are two different things. The accommodations or adaptations should be occurring in the midst of learning activities or in the middle of assessments, not things that occur afterward. Next is differentiated instruction. This is your opportunity to describe how you and your lesson meet the unique needs of learners based on readiness, interests, learning styles. So what different ways are you going to teach students? Obviously, you're not going to have the same exact form of activity and process for every single step of your lesson plan. So you may be showing a video during one thing, doing a book reading during another, engaging in primary source or visual images in a third activity. Students could be writing, they could be discussing, they could be doing collaborative work, individual work. That's what we mean by differentiation. So there's a wide range of examples in there in the descriptions as to what you could be doing. Next is collaboration, and there are two parts to collaboration. First is how are you going to communicate with families about what is occurring in class. So you may have an email you're sending home on a daily basis, or the beginning or end of a unit. You may have a newsletter that you send home before once a month or the beginning of a major learning activity. It also may be a letter home that you send home for students in, let's say, a notebook that they take every day. That's the first part of communication. And you do not just write that you're going to have this type of communication. In the final lesson plan, you need to provide that communication. In the draft, you can provide an overview statement, some depth as to what's in that, but you do not have to provide the entire thing at this point in time. I encourage you to go with an email. It's the simplest form of communication. Newsletters can be time intensive, and it's only one small component of the overall grade. You get graded the same amount for an email to parents as you would for a very in-depth newsletter, so use your time wisely. The second form of communication is how are you going to ensure student understanding and engagement in the classroom. This may be through, as it notes here, recognizing how cultural and gender differences can affect communication in the classroom, having effective strategies for conveying ideas and information and asking questions. How do you monitor the effects of your messages? How do you restate ideas, draw conclusions? Different types of cues you use in your lesson planning and your teaching. Being sensitive to nonverbal cues. And using a variety of media communication tools, visual aids, and technologies to enrich learning opportunities. In your lesson plan, you might already be doing many of these things, so at that point you just have to describe what those are. Next, you include an overview of resources that you are using in your lesson plan. And if you're not embedding resources into the lesson plan itself, include either at the end of the lesson plan as a running tally of documents, or include as attachments. That includes any handouts, worksheets, exit slips, PowerPoints, things like that. If it is something that you can create or put together and share visually, then please provide it. If it's a children's book that's a resource, or some video clip that's a resource, provide the appropriate digital links so I could access those resources and review them. Finally is the reflection. Now, because you are not teaching this lesson, which would be reflection in action and reflection of action, you're going to be engaging in reflection for action, which means prior to instruction. So at this point, you've gotten feedback from me as the instructor on the inquiry lesson plan. After you submit the draft lesson plan, you will have a second round of feedback from me. And so you'll have developed a lesson 3 times during the midst of preparation for the final lesson plan. First before the inquiry lesson plan submission, next before the lesson plan draft submission, and then a third time before the LiveText final submission. That gives you ample opportunity to reflect upon the development of the lesson plan. At a minimum, it should be a half page in length, single-spaced. But consider this question: what have you personally learned from the developmental process? The fears and uncertainties associated with the planning? And what challenges and epiphanies have emerged during the planning of this instruction? Next, I want to share with you the 2 exemplars and show how they enacted those components. So this is lesson plan exemplar number 1. You'll notice this student for an extension added in another book. Students will read Maps and Geography, Junior Genius Guides by Ken Jennings. And so they'll gain a deeper understanding of maps, and they'll also participate in a number of activities that are included in the book. The remediation is a guided reading activity where the teacher and the students read Me on the Map by Joan Sweeney. Provides simple, systematic introduction to maps. And the student notes that the teacher will guide students through the reading of the book, provide additional information that will support comprehension, such as definitions, labeling the map features, and connecting the content to the student experience. One thing that would have been nice to see in this one was how is the teacher going to assess student understanding from the book to ensure mastery of the concepts addressed with the supporting question in the very first formative assessment. Accommodations had very detailed accommodations for each, including visual accommodations to support the learning of ELL students, such as maps, pictures, and labels, items with assisting with vocabulary and reading, mentioning collaborations with ELL teacher or translator to ask for assistance in helping ELL students better understand the content, providing vocabulary, key vocabulary and terms and definitions in both languages so students can gain some understanding. Special education. Provided generic overviews. I would prefer mentions a very specific population that you're working with. But this student did okay because she noted that throughout the lesson, students who need special needs will be provided with more time to complete assignments, extra instruction when needed, pair with other students for assistance throughout the lesson, and mentions a couple of different other kinds of accommodations. However, these are general accommodations. I would like you to identify a particular type of student learning disability that could be attended to, and what accommodation you would make for that disability. Finally is the gifted students. This student provided feedback, or asked gifted students to help other students who may need assistance with comprehension. I really wanted to see a little more depth with this students. Gifted students accommodation. What if something they could do above and beyond, not just helping someone else? Differentiated instruction. Talked about the different writing and reading skills occurring. Opportunities to collaborate during the lessons. Providing feedback, peer feedback. Providing relevant information, helpful information that they can connect to. And then you'll see mentions of collaboration. There's a newsletter that's highlighted and provides a brief overview of it. But this student provided the newsletter at the very end of the lesson plan as a separate attachment. And then mentioned the ways in which they were going to communicate with students appropriately. So reiteration of questions, trying to ensure engaging students in unbiased gender fashion, having a class cup of names. Those were some examples. And then resources. Reflection. Provided a pretty detailed reflection during the development of the lesson plan, the inquiry one after getting feedback on the draft, and then prior to submitting the final lesson plan. The second exemplar had similar items included, but this one you'll notice provided very specific step-by-step mentions of an extension activity, providing mentions of National Geographic, remediation was using technology, Meet the Greens, and students completed this activity, took a quiz, did a little for other learning opportunities during that. Students with disability mentioned some very specific things that were going to happen during the lesson. Students with giftedness were nominated as team leaders whenever students are split into groups. Don't know how appropriate that is because it sets the gifted students apart from other students in class and in maybe negative ways, or maybe perceived as negative ways. Students with language barriers provided 3 different examples. Actually, I'm sorry, 4 different examples. Differentiate instruction, talk about doing a raft activity, electronic information resources, different types of assessment, different flexible grouping, visual materials. Provided the letter home or email. And then noted part 2, making connections to student real-life experiences was a way to communicate, restating directions, ensuring to call on one student at a time to state just part of directions, so you get a chain of insight into what the directions were, so student understanding is assured. Reflection was just one lengthy paragraph, which was fine, but you could see progression through this reflection that covered the before the inquiry lesson plan, during the draft stage, and before submitting the final copy. Now the rubric I will tackle in a third video. My time is up on this one, so I will tackle the rubric next.